Hey guys, I am so excited to get to share a little bit about the strategic pricing model with you today and kind of break down some of these different pricing structures, what's worked well for me. I've literally tried everything under the sun kind of before I arrived at this point. So I'm excited to get to share this kind of like hodgepodge of just thoughts and things that I've learned, and I hope that some of it resonates with you and that you're able to take it and to kind of analyze. It's a great time at the end of the year to analyze where you're at with your pricing, if there are any price increases or changes or like process changes that you need to make before the new year to better like value yourself and to better serve your clients. So kind of the first type of pricing that you might be familiar with or you might use is pricing by time. So that can look a lot of different ways. You could maybe price hourly, you could have like a day rate, you could price by month, you could even have like flat rate packages, but they're based on your estimate of your time. So anything that is like pulling time into the equation kind of falls under this bracket. And I think there's some really great things about this, and then there's some not so great things about this. So for starters, when you're pricing by time, I think kind of like the ultimate red flag for me is that you're punishing efficiency, because if you get better at your job, if you get faster at your job, if you're able to like move through the process more efficiently, then ultimately you're getting paid less because you're spending less time on it, even though it's probably taken you a ton of time to build up into that point of being able to do your job more efficiently. And so especially something like design work, photography, like any of these kind of like visual creative things, it can be really difficult to price by time because you're not able to grow and to then like you're not able to grow in your skill and in your salary at the same time. If you're getting better at your skill, then your salary is decreasing. So I think there are some ways around that I'll talk about with strategic pricing in a minute, but that's kind of like my biggest reason for not suggesting that people work with pricing by time. Kind of some positives of that, just to talk about the flip side a little bit. Your time does matter. Like ultimately your time is a really big factor in your work life. It's a really big factor in your personal life. So allotting for time when you're thinking about pricing, I do think is important, but I think that putting all of your eggs in that basket really, like I said, punishes efficiency. And the other thing with that is that it a lot of times leaves clients hanging. So unless you're like making that flat rate decision based on your pricing up front, your clients don't know what they're walking into. They have no idea what their investment's going to look like. They have no idea what they're signing up for, and ultimately you're just like asking them to be along for the ride. And in some situations, it's just inevitable. It just has to happen. But in a lot of situations, it can be avoided. And it really just creates like a more trusting kind of like foundational relationship between you and your clients that's built on them knowing what to expect and them knowing what they're going to get, and the same being true for you. So that's kind of that first lump of any type of pricing by time. The second kind of big section is pricing based on deliverables, based on like what you're creating. So say you're offering like one logo, one color, one color palette, one mark, and that's kind of like a super foundational basic package. Well, if you're charging because those are the deliverables, that's charging based on what you're giving a client. Same thing if you're doing a bigger package. If you're like, okay, well, I charge this much for a pattern, this much for 3 logos, this much for this, that's all pricing based on deliverables. I do again think that there is a place for this, and I really have like pulled them all together in the way that I price myself, which I'll get to kind of towards the end of this video. But again, kind of just to like touch on the cons first, because I'll combine everything at the end in terms of pros. But when you are pricing just based on deliverables, clients are generally not understanding the process. So I do strategy sessions in my business. Strategy is like a whole facet of the process for me. I really tell clients that strategy is a deliverable for them, but a lot of people do kind of a more strategic design approach rather than brand strategy as a whole. And so if you're putting all of this strategy into what you're doing for a client, but they're just paying for the final product, they probably aren't going to value your process in the same way that you do, and they're probably not going to understand the cost, or they're not going to understand how you got there, or maybe they're going to have a lot of feedback because they're not going to understand how important your process is. So when you're pricing on deliverables, people just like, it feels like a one-stop shop. Like you run into Target and you pick something off the shelf and you go and you have no idea what went into that process. And so I think with a service-based business, pricing just for the product rather than the process, that's deliverable-based pricing, it can result again in like not super strong client relationships because there's a lack of understanding and there's ultimately a gap in what you're doing and what they're doing. So that's kind of like that second bucket. The third bucket, I would say, is value-based pricing, which a lot of you guys have probably heard of this. I think value-based pricing is really great, but when I first heard about value-based pricing, I thought that it was like sleazy almost, if I'm just being super honest. And now that I know about it, I don't think that at all. But it sounded to me, and if I put myself in the shoes of a client, it sounds a little bit like, okay, if a client makes, you know, $500,000 a year, that you're going to charge them $15,000 for a project, but if a client makes $50,000 a year, you're going to charge them $500 or something like that. It's this sliding scale, which again doesn't value what you do. And that's not the reality if you actually sit and learn about value-based pricing and the intention behind it, but I think there are a lot of people who don't understand what value-based pricing is. So I sometimes am like a little bit wary of using that word because I think that clients don't understand what it is and it can feel to them like it's not genuine. And again, that's not the reality, but I think that our language in our businesses is super important, that it communicates to clients and not just to fellow designers. The really great things about value-based pricing are that you're basically considering how much the client values something to create a price on it. So they're paying for how much they want it. It's kind of like a demand situation. Like if they want it really bad, they're willing to pay more for it. And the same is true, like there are examples of value-based pricing in everyday life. Like Morgan Rapp, who does a lot on value-based pricing and does a great job with it, talks a lot about like if you were to go to an airport and get a Coke, you're paying $5 for a Coke and you're paying $1 if you get it outside of the airport, but you're willing to pay for it because you're in an airport because you value it more at that moment. So that's a really great like real life example. You're kind of like, I care so much about this, why am I paying $5? But you're also like, but it's worth $5 to me because I'm here and I want it now and it's valuable to me. I have sort of taken like a blend of all of these approaches and created something that I call strategic pricing. So I use a lot of value-based pricing kind of structure and like backbone in my business, but I also have found it to be really important for me personally to factor in time, to factor in deliverables, to factor in like the demand and how much I have to offer. Like I only have 10 spots a year, so there's kind of like a supply and demand piece of that. Thinking about the client's return on their investment, thinking about the size of their business, thinking about what they need, and what you can offer them. So for a really long time, I did flat rate pricing, but it didn't allow clients to actually get what was best for them. So like I would say, here's my package. It comes with a primary logo, a secondary logo, maybe a couple of secondary logos, a couple brand marks, a full color palette, a pattern or icons, a style guide, and you're done. And there was no where to go from there. So if a client wanted something else, it was like add-on after add-on after add-on after add-on. And I hate add-ons. I feel like they kind of go back to that like time investment almost, like, or that time pricing model where clients don't know what to expect. So like if they buy this branding package, well then what if they need a couple of print pieces? What if they need a couple of like social media graphics or some other digital design work? Like all of a sudden, the investment they thought they were making is not the reality at all. So it can be really frustrating, again, kind of break down that trust between you and your clients because there's this gap in communication and what they're needing and what they're actually getting. So for me, I have like pulled all of these things together to create strategic pricing. So I do consider my time. I have 10 spots a year. So if I think about the salary that I want to make and I divide it by 10, my project average needs to be around that. So this year I made a little bit over 6 figures as a business, not necessarily as a person, which is a whole separate thing, but my business made 6 figures this year. So my average project cost was like $12,000-ish. And I knew that I could take a couple of projects that were $5,000. I love to be able to work with clients who are starting out and have smaller budgets, and I really don't want to alienate them. But then I also worked with clients that were spending 5 times that much. But I had kind of that like estimated, like this is the average that I need to be at to make the money that my business needs to make this year. So that's the time piece and the supply and demand piece that I do think is super beneficial and is not good to skip over. I think in a lot of like pricing, it's all custom and it's all this and that and the other, and it's all like, it can feel like a mind game to me sometimes. And so I think going back to some of the basics like time can be super great. So I would encourage you to think about what is your goal of what you would like to make in 2021. How many projects do you want to work with and how much do you want to make? And then divide the number of how much you want to make as a salary or as a business, and then divide that by the number of projects. And then you know your average that you need to be charging around there per project. Again, sometimes you charge half that much, sometimes you charge 3 times that much, but it all kind of comes together to create an average that gets your business where it needs to be so that you can pay yourself, pay your employees, invest in education, like all of those types of things. Then kind of the next piece of the puzzle with strategic pricing is that I love to then consider the deliverables, because that is a really big piece of what I'm charging for. So I'll think about what a client needs is normally where I start, like everything that would be ideal for them. Sometimes they don't go for all of that. Sometimes they need to kind of start small and bite things off piece by piece. But say I think a client needs, I think every client needs strategy. That's like not an option in my book. So we do strategy, we do this full branding suite, we do a ton of print stuff, and then I also think they would really benefit from like a lot of digital design. So a full website, social media graphics, email templates, like I think they need the whole deal. That will then be my goal based on the deliverables, and we can walk down from there if we need to with the client. But those deliverables do factor into my pricing because I'm like, wow, they're getting a lot. Like it's taking me a lot of time. It's taking me a ton of investment. It's taking me a ton of like creative brain power and like things to come up with. And they're getting a lot out of it. So there should be a price tag connected to that. Then I think the next 2 things, then I do take value into play. I'm like, how much does the client value this? What will this bring for their business? What's the return on their investment? How well is their business doing? What's to come for them? Are they full-time? Do they have a team? Are they smaller? So I do think about that, because when you're designing for something that's going to be used by a team of people, or say they have a storefront, like they still might just need basic branding, but you have a lot more to think about. You have to think about how well things are going to print on a sign versus if they are a smaller business and they don't have a storefront. There are some things that you just don't have to think about. So like, it is thinking about value, but it's also all these tangible pieces. And then for me, kind of this piece of strategic pricing that I feel like is really different from these 3 other models, aside from combining all of them, is the fact that I consider process. So strategy is something that I talk about a lot. I'll continue to talk more and more about it, but I think strategy is so crucial to a business. I always tell business owners, like, if they can't afford to invest in design yet, they still need to invest in strategy. They need to know who their target audience is. They need to know what their messaging is. They need to have a grasp on what they value as a business. What do they want to bring to the table for their clients? And so my process really unearths all of that. We do like a super in-depth, like normally it's about 2-hour strategy session over Zoom. Long term, I would love to move these in person, if it's possible for me to get to my clients or my clients to get to me. So it's like a really big thing to do strategy, and it takes a lot of brain power. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of research. And so they do, like I said earlier, I do think of strategy as being a deliverable where they're getting this like huge PDF presentation at the end of strategy that has tons of information that they can send when they're trying to promote their business to like wholesalers. They can use bits and pieces of it on their website. They can use it kind of like to bring their team together, like so many things. But ultimately, strategy is less tangible than design work. And so if you're just charging for your time, or you're just charging for your deliverables, or you're just charging for the value, I think there's this kind of process piece that is really easy to skip over. So I pull together time, deliverables, value, and then that final piece of process to really create custom quotes for all of my clients. And I think I used to shy away from custom quotes because I felt like people wanted to know the pricing right when they got to the website. They don't even want to reach out if they can't afford it. And now I have really shifted my mindset to where I think my clients really enjoy introductory calls. Plenty of them don't book, plenty of them do book, but either way, like, we really enjoy getting to know each other and to see what they need, like what's their problem and then what's the solution, and how do we cross that bridge to be able to get from point A to point B. And so we talk a lot on the phone about, or on Zoom, about what are the issues that they're trying to solve, what is working in their business, but also what's not working, and how can we fill that gap with what my business offers. And then kind of like, I guess I would say the last thing is that when I pull together a custom proposal and I tell my clients this, it lets me give them what they need and not extra things. Like, if they don't need a brand pattern, they don't need to pay for the time and the energy and the process and the deliverable of creating a brand pattern. So I really try to ask a lot of questions that help me to determine what type of the business the client has, what they need, what the solution is, and what I can offer. And then I'm able to pull all of that together and create a custom quote with a couple of tiers. And then we can kind of work from there and figure out, is this in their budget? Is there maybe some more that they need and we should bump up? Is there less that they need, or do they need to kind of break things off piece by piece, and we'll go down from there. So doing this strategic pricing model, just like everything else in my business, and I think a lot of you guys' businesses, is thinking first about strategy and thinking about why we're doing what we're doing, what's the point, what is going to be a long-term result, and what's going to ultimately solve the problem. So I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions about strategic pricing, I would love to answer them. Feel free to shoot me a DM or a comment below, and I'm excited to hear what you guys think.